Hey guys, Dave here. Welcome to Centurions Review, the punk rock band of Wargame Review institutions. I have Ram Speed here, Naval Warfare in the Bronze Age. It's one of the micro history games, micro history game number 2 from Metagaming. This is one of my favorite micro games of all time. We're going to start by going over the components, and then I'll go over the sequence of play, and I'll show some of the movements you can do. I usually play this game with miniatures. It's actually not made with miniatures, so I'll show you the board game components, but then when I show you all the moves and stuff, I'll do it with miniatures, just make it more interesting. But basically, it's a blue versus red generic trireme game. The ships don't represent any ships from any particular nations or so forth, but it's a really good game. Counters, well, they're what you would expect from 1980, nothing special. They just represent the different types of ships, and you have grapple and drifting counters. I've chosen to, since they're so simple, I've chosen to do it with miniatures. It's just more fun. Map's just a big blue map, not very interesting. It's got the cardinal directions on the bottom. Alright, here's the rule book. Let's go through that. It's 19 pages. Sequence of plays start with rolling for initiative, and then you do the first player's movement, followed by the second player's movement, then missile attacks, and then boarding. That's if you're grappled to the other ship. So movement, let's do it with, I'll show you with miniatures. So the way I've ported this to the miniatures game is, for example, if a ship had like 6 inches of movement, that would be 6 inches, or excuse me, not 6 inches of movement, 6 hexes of movement. That would just be 6 inches of movement in the miniatures game. So the first is just straight ahead movement, where you just measure if you're doing miniatures or count hexes. Each ship type has its own movement factor, and there's double speed in this game, and each galley 3 times during the game can move at double speed. And there's also triple speed, and that one is once per game you can do that. So you'll save those for when it looks like you're about to, you're within range to ram another ship. That's usually what you'd save those for, or if you want to run away or something. Okay, another type of movement is side-slipping movement. With that, you'd move 1 hex forward, and then you'd can move 1 hex to the right, so I just do 1 inch forward or 1 to the right. And then there's changing course. If you're doing it on a hex, you always move the back of the ship to change course, and with a hex, obviously it would be a 45-degree movement each time. So I've just made little templates to allow movement. So if he wants to, this is his bow right here, the front of the ship, so if he wants to point his bow to the left and move this to the right with this template, and he can move up to that far as 45 degrees. And I got another template if you want to move the other direction. It's always the back of the ship you move. And you can also do reverse movement in this. Reverse movement counts as 2 hexes of movement, so in the miniatures game, reversing 1 inch would count as 2 inches of movement. And then we went over double speed and triple speed. With double speed, you can't reverse or change course, you can only move forwards. And the same with triple speed. And if your galley, the oars take too much damage, it will end up slowing you down. If you use triple speed, you'll end up drifting on the next turn. Alright, and then there's ramming in this. For ramming, you have to move at least half your movement. So let's just say this had a 6-inch movement. So to ram this, it would have to move 3. If you're using triple speed, you have to have moved 6 inches before ramming. And of course, ramming can do damage to the other ship. And there's a ramming table you can use. Alright, so when ramming, it takes into account what type of ship you are and what the target is. And then it gives these numbers here. and you have to roll less than or equal to that to have a successful ramming attack. And there's some modifiers such as the target's grappled, or if it's drifting, or so forth, if it's a flank attack or a stern attack. And then after that, you would do get your damage from ramming from this table here. Other times when you just move into a contact and you haven't gone far enough for it to be a ram, after you move into contact you can try to grapple. So this is a table you would roll on to try to successfully grapple the ship. The good thing about grappling is you can send boarding parties over to try and kill the crew of the ship and take control of the ship. If you take control of the ship, you can't use it to attack other ships. Then you can basically just run the ship and try to get it off board. So basically you're capturing it as a prize. And as far as sheer attacks, you'd have to start behind the ship and go completely past it like that, and then you would check the chart to see if you damaged any oars after rolling. So those are the basic movements in this game. And there's also missile fire. When you start a scenario, you're given a certain amount of points you can use to buy ships, and when you buy the ships you can choose things like what type of missile weapons you have, or if you have archers, or how many boarding parties you have. Each ship has a certain amount of capacity, and so whenever you buy something here it has capacity points. So like here, a Penta Counter has a capacity of 2, so it can only hold up to 4 archers. It's a small ship. And other things like onagers and ballistas and so forth take up more of a capacity. I found in this game, usually when people first play it, they get a lot of missile stuff for their ships, and they end up losing the game. The way to, I wouldn't say guarantee success in this, to have the most success is to play kind of like the Roman Navy, where you're not worried about missiles attacks or shearing or ramming as much. What you're, well, ramming you are worried about, but the way you're trying to destroy the other ships is not through ramming, but it's trying to come into contact any way you can, and then successfully grappling the ship and boarding it and using your boarding troops to take over the ship. So that's the most successful tactic that I found in this game. People who overdo the missile weapons, generally they lose this game. The thing I forgot to mention are the different types of damage you can take. You can take hull damage, which could eventually sink your ship. You can have rowing bank damage, which will eventually slow you down if you take too much of it. And you can take boarding party losses or damage on missile weapons. Oftentimes when you hit a ship like with missile weapons, you'll roll to see what exactly you hit, whether it's one of the missile weapons on board, or the hull, or like the boarding party, and so forth. So the 3 scenarios of squadron combat, which is a very small game. You only have 120 build points, so you're only going to have a small number of ships. Maybe if it's a 2-player game, maybe 4 ships or something. And fleet action, that one gives you 220 build points, so you'll be able to have more ships. And the 3rd scenario is convoy. In convoy, you get a lot more build points, and in that one you win if you get 3 merchantmen captured or sunk. The merchantmen are just small ships that really don't have any weaponry. They just have crew on board. So how do I like this game? I like it a lot. This has got everything that a trireme game needs. The only thing it's missing would be like a mechanic to land troops onto the shore, but other than that, just combat in the sea. It's got everything you need, and it's in a small package, and it's an inexpensive game. Even though this is from 1980, you can actually still buy it new. It hasn't been in production, but Half Price Books has this on occasion. They only charge like $8 for it. I guess they got some new old stock or something, but what's cool is you get to customize your ships, and so does your opponent. And like I said, I found that trying to win through boarding parties is the best way to do it. Some people, like I said, especially when they're new at this, they're trying to win through missile fire, which is almost always a bad idea. If you try to win through ramming, sometimes you're going to win, but I think boarding parties are the best way to go. So basically using Roman tactics. Doesn't have a rule for a corvus like the Romans had on their ships, but there's nothing to say you couldn't add a rule for that. But yeah, I think for a little inexpensive game, this has got everything you'll ever need in a trireme game whatsoever. So if you see this at Half Price Books for $8, I definitely recommend picking it up. Thanks for watching and have a good evening.